Are modern supports really that much better than our older ones? Is Nihility really that weak? Well, that's what we're gonna find out today, as I'll be jotting down every single support and how much they increase your damage as the solo support. Then I'll put them on a tier list or some list in general, and at the end I'll go over the findings or stuff I found interesting. I'll be completely ignoring light cones as that's a whole nother can of worms, and it's especially tricky with Harmony, and I don't want to just give every Nihility character Cipher's light cone. I will cover 5-star Eidolons and up to E2 for certain supports, however it will not impact the tier list as it will just be their E0 version. And I do think you may be quite surprised what happens when Eidolons are added. Quick disclaimer, the results should not impact who you pull for, and actual performance will greatly change based on teammates, self-kits, and other factors. We're just here to see how impactful their damage amp is in comparison to their peers for one attack. Also, Cipher will be joining the list. With that out the way, let's get into the rules and how we're gonna do it. To keep this part short because it's a pretty long video, I'll just go over the important parts and put some text on the screen if you want to pause. But basically, we are looking strictly for the damage increase, which means we do not care about personal damage, speed, or other funny buffs. Next, let's move on to who we'll be buffing. TLDR, we got God King Scott, and here are his average stats. Moving on to the supports, that's also just as important. Again, to save time, TLDR, pretty good relics, no light cones, and no set effects that would impact results. For those who are buffing things like break effect or speed, you're kind of out of luck, but oh well. As for the contestants, we will have a total of 24 characters, 11 Harmony, 8 Nihility, 2 Erudition, and 3 Hunt. As for the order, we will be going alphabetically to keep things simple. As such, we will start with our favorite feeble scholar, Anaxa Asta, who with his talent and an Erudition teammate, will grant the team a 50% damage bonus at E0. This results in a 33.6% damage increase and puts him barely into C tier. Now, his E1 grants a 16% defense shred, upping the increase to 47.76%. And now to his E2, it grants a 20% res shred, which when Anaxa is on the field, increases Scott's damage by 77.3%, which is not bad at all for a non-traditional support. Next, we have Asta, who was one of our OG supports. Asta provides 52.8 speed at talent level 12, which we unfortunately are not counting. Her talent, however, at 5 stacks gives 77% attack, and paired with her Trace 2, gives 18% fire damage to the team, which would result in Asta granting a 48.5% damage increase, which will put her right in the middle of C tier. Moving to Bronya, who was the strongest support back in the day, let's see how much she actually buffs. Her skill grants 66% damage bonus paired with her Trace 3, totaling up to 76%. Now, a 220 crit damage Bronya ult will be granting 55% attack and 55 crit damage. Totaling all that up, Bronya with all the buffs will be improving your damage by a whopping 124%. Easy S tier. Blackswan, while often known for being the damage in the dot teams, actually provides a lot of damage amp. Her skill has 20.8% death shred, and the ult has 25% vulnerability. So at E0, it will be a 42.78% increase, which would be slightly under Asta. Her E1 grants a 25% res shred to the elements the enemy currently has a dot of. This would result in a 78.48% damage increase, which is right alongside our E2 Anaxa. Next is Cipher, who won't be releasing for a few more weeks, but thankfully we know her kit. At a baseline, she will always grant a 40% vulnerability thanks to her Trace 3. Now, her talent and Trace 2 allows her to record all damage dealt to enemies and convert it to true damage via her ult. This damage recording mechanic can just be viewed as another damage amp. Now, when paired with her Trace 1, and assuming you meet the speed requirements, it would record 24% to the main target and 16% to adjacents. Now, to be fair, I will average out in a blast environment, which just becomes an 18.66% damage increase. Now, with all of that, Cipher at E0 is a 66% damage increase, putting her as the first of the B tiers. Her E1 gives her a lot of attack, which is irrelevant in this, but it does make her record damage more efficiently, 150% to be exact. This means she'll be recording 36% for the main target and 24% for the adjacent. This results in a 79% damage increase, which honestly isn't that big of a jump from E1. So is this E1 bad? Not really. Just remember, Cipher will also be contributing her own personal damage, which the 80% attack will be greatly contributing towards, meaning more true damage in the end. But we're not counting that here, so in regards to damage amp, E1 is not that much. E2, however, grants another 30% vulnerability, which jumps our final number to 117%. Next is Fugue, which when excluding the break effect and super break multiplier, she only grants 18% defense shred, which is a 12% damage increase. Straight to D tier. While she's fantastic in break teams, she is not meant to be a traditional DPS support. Moving on to Guanifin, who was the original vulnerability debuffer and not some cheap knockoff. Now, in E6 Guanifin, with 4 Fire Kill stacks grants 30.4% vulnerability, which is a 30.4% damage increase, putting her barely into the C tier. Hanya is next, known for being the OG SP support. Here, her ult grants 64.8% attack and 21 speed. This paired with her Trace 1 gives a total of 74.8% attack. Her talent, combined with her E6, gives 43% damage bonus. In total, it is a 69.69% damage increase, which is actually slightly higher than Cipher. And honestly, I was not expecting that at all. Next is Jade. So I thought she gave some buffs besides that 30 speed, but no, I guess not. 0% damage increase, the bottom of the barrel. Moving on, we have Jiaoqiu, the guy that infected the Acheron subreddit and caused a whole new wave of brain rot. Question is he stronger than Cipher? Well, with his 40% vulnerability from his talent and 15% ult vulnerability via his ult, that'll result in a 55% damage increase, falling short of Cipher's 66% and B tier. His E1 gives 40% damage bonus, which then shoots up the amp to 96.67%, which is really good. Now, in regards to performance for Acheron, sorry, but the cat robs the fox's JOB when it cooks. Hut March time. While her skill does give 10 speed, the only thing that amps damage will be her Trace 3, which gives her master 60 crit damage, and using our God King Scott, it would be a 22.2% damage increase. Straight to D tier. Yunli and Yanqing would be very disappointed. Next is Moze, who falls under a similar situation as Blackswan. Known for dealing damage but provides a surprising amount of damage amp. His Trace 3 provides a 25% follow-up vulnerability, and his E2 grants an additional 40 crit damage on the marked target. Totaling it up, we get a 43.5% damage increase, which is barely above Blackswan, who sits at 42.79%. C tier. Moving on to Pela, who is like the second best 4-star in the game, alongside Tingyun. She provides a 42% defense shred. This equates to a 33.6% damage increase. Yeah, it's kinda low. Normally when people are talking about Pela, pros is probably included, which pushes it around to 45%. But yeah, she doesn't get that luxury this time. However, her E4 does provide 12% ice shred, which we will include because Scott is a master of all 7 elements. So we'll put the total amp to 49.63%, which is slightly above Asta. Next we have Remembrance Trailblazer. A RMC with 230 crit damage will have Mem giving 57 crit damage, and their E1 will give 10 crit rate, a total of 77 CV. Mem's skill at talent level 7 is 30 true damage. Pretty simple so far. Here's where the path diverges. RMC's Trace 3 gives additional true damage based on their energy over 100, up to 20%. But what if they don't have energy? Well, E4 gives 4% to make up for it. So I've decided to split the two camps. If you have 200 energy, RMC gives a total of 50 true damage, for a total amp of 96%. But if you don't, it would only be 77.7%. I probably should have taken the average energy amount of like 140, but past me decided to go with that 77%, so that's what we're gonna run with. B tier. Ah yes, next is Robin, and we all just happen to live in her world. But let's see why that's the case. Robin's skill grants 50% damage bonus, and her talent gives an unconditional 20 crit damage. Her Trace 2 grants 20 follow-up crit damage, which our Scott will be able to utilize. But most importantly, her ult, which outside of the personal damage and action advance, it still gives 1141 attack or 112% attack, assuming you have 3800 attack. This in total leads us to a 126% damage increase, which is above even the likes of Bronya, not to mention how you can have 100% uptime. Top of S tier. When including her E1, which is a 24% res pen, it jumps to a whopping 180%. Yeah, that's pretty crazy, but also a bit unexpected. Why is it jumping so much? It should just be a 24% damage increase, no? Yeah, I'll cover that near the end. But moving on, we have Ruan Mei, who was the original duo DPS support, but is now mostly used in break teams. Let's see if her buffs have stood the test of time. Ruan Mei's skill grants break efficiency, but we're just here for that 32% damage bonus. This paired with her Trace 3 gives a total of 68% damage bonus. Now, with her ult, which was the OG source of res pen, it gives a total of 25. And in total, Ruan Mei grants a 82% damage increase, putting her at the top of B tier. Her E1 after ult grants an additional 20% defense ignore, which bumps the number to an 82% damage increase. And E2, which if the enemy is broken, grants an additional 40% attack. This makes it a 141% increase. Overall, Ruan Mei is still a fantastic buffer and still competes with the other top tiers in this department. But as we all know, Ruan Mei stays on the break team. SilverW time. Hopefully the buffs in 3.4 will make her much easier to play. Thankfully we'll see soon enough. But as you may have noticed, I said easier to play, because honestly, she doesn't really need buffs for her damage amp. SilverW's skill has a 20% res down for the weakness she implanted, paired with another 10% all type res totals to a 30% res down. Her Trace 3 grants another 3%, which is honestly so little, so hopefully they change this, but it now totals to a 33% res shred. SilverW's ult and talent gives a total of 55% defense shred. This gives SilverW a total of a 94% damage amp, putting her as the first of the A tiers, which RMC could have been too, but oh well. Honestly, I do hope they put her E1 in her base kit and instead of that Trace 3, and also change her E2. Now to the next Quantum Girl, Sparkle. I know a lot of people said she's been power crept and whatnot, but I think people will be quite surprised with the results. I will note, I bet she's gonna be crazy strong once Archer comes out, perhaps pushing her back in a 0.5 tier. Moving on with the buffs, Sparkle grants 98 crit damage assuming she has 220 herself. Her ult, when paired with her talent, gives 48 damage bonus. Now, just like RMC, our path diverges again. This time, it will be because of her Trace 3, which grants differing amounts of attack based on the amount of quantum characters on the team. I do have the results when there are 3 quantum characters, but for what I'll be calculating, I will just have Sparkle as the solo quantum character. So assuming this fact, she will just give 20% attack, which totals to a 95% damage increase. This will put her as the second A tier character. Moving on to her Eidolons, her E1 gives 40% attack, which gives a decent increase to 126%. And her E2 gives a 24% defense ignore, moving that final amp to 163%. Now, if she did have some other quantum teammates, she can grant an additional 25% attack. Here's the numbers on the screen, but yeah, really freaking strong. Next is the other OP birdie, Sunday. I think we all have a pretty good idea where he's gonna go, but let's see regardless. So Sunday, just like all the other Harmony units, got some funny business going on, which will split up the results, that being the varying buffs depending if the unit has a summon or not. For what will stay consistent, his Trace 1 gives 20 crit rate, and his ult, at 230 crit damage, is giving around 82 crit damage. His skill gives 30% damage bonus if the user doesn't have a summon, and 80% if they do, which is a pretty sizable jump. So assuming you do have a summon, Sunday buffs a whopping 133.7%, and 82% if you don't have one. Now, I will let Scott get that additional 50% from the skill, which will put Sunday at the top of the tier list. Looking at his Eidolons, his E1 gives the user a 16% shred, and the summon 40%. For the no summon increase, that's just an easy 16% shred, which results in a 102% damage increase. For when there is a summon, I've opted to find the average defense ignore, so a 28% shred, which will result in a 180% damage increase. His E2 is pretty boring, but it gives 30% damage bonus. And here are the overall results. Honestly, it's pretty surprising to see how an E2 Sunday buffing a non-summon ally is doing similar as the E0 with a summon. Okay, but enough of Sunday, we now just have 5 more characters left to go. Tingyun is now in the mix, but sadly we won't be abusing Dance 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 with her. Her skill at talent level 12 gives 55% attack, and her ult will give 56% damage bonus. This results in a 69.64% damage increase, which is nearly identical to how much Hanya buffs, B tier. Though I must say, Hanya buffs a surprising amount. But of course, Tingyun's energy and tendency to spam Dance 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 is pretty strong. Next is Topaz, another sub DPS. When casting her skill, that's 50% fall of vulnerability, which just translates to a 50% damage increase. Top of C tier. Now, her E1 can give a total of 50 follow-up crit damage, which would increase our Scott's damage by 77.7%. Next is Tribbie, who's currently dominating a majority of the endgame modes, so let's see why that may be the case. Tribbie's skill grants a 24% res spent, and her ult is a 30% vulnerability. Her Trace 2 gives 9% HP, which is the equivalent of 18% attack, but we'll just be using Scott's HP scaling. Overall, assuming you can get the HP, Tribbie is just a 67.3% damage increase, which is actually the bottom of the B tiers. Now, her E1 is supposedly really freaking broken, but let's see if that's actually the case. Basically, this allows you to focus 24% of the damage dealt to enemies and deal it all to one guy. This is also basically a new 24% multiplier, and when putting in our scenario, this results in a 107% damage increase. Now, having E1 myself, I can say in scenarios where you're dealing overkill damage to the trash mobs, it's OP. But when facing something like the Banacademic, it's pretty good. Okay, just 2 more. Welt, super boring. His ult provides a 12% vulnerability, which is a 12% damage increase, D tier. And finally, the supposed worst support in the game, Yukong. Her skill grants 88% attack, while her ult can give 29.4 crit rate and 70.2 crit damage. Her Trace 2 grants 12% imaginary damage bonus. Totaling those numbers up, it would be a 125.53% damage increase, which actually puts her in 3rd place for our damage amping tier list. I don't think anyone has ever doubted her damage amping capabilities, but she's just really hard to use, and that's not including the uptime. But perhaps a particular deliverer can somehow extend these buffs for himself. And yeah, that's everyone. I'm now just gonna go over some notes and answer some potential questions. Firstly, why are the Eidolons amping more than what they should be? Isn't 25% true damage just a 25% damage increase? Well, let's look at Tribbie for this case. As you can see, at E0, it's a 67.6% damage increase, while E1 is 107%. Now, if we multiply the damage at E0, which is 56,000, by 25%, it actually does result in us getting that E1 damage. So, to answer the question, it's because I'm not tracking the incremental increase with each Eidolon. Instead, I'm comparing every damage value back to the fixed baseline. Next topic, why Tribbie and Cipher are stronger than on paper. As we can see, the numbers put Cipher and Tribbie in the middle of the pack, but their performance will likely eclipse many other supports. And why is that? Basically, it's because they're adding in new and often rare multipliers which will not be diluted by the current buffs. This ties back with the idea of diminishing returns, but now on the opposite side of the spectrum, where focusing on new multipliers can greatly increase your actual damage. This segues perfectly to the initial question. Is Nihility really that bad? Well, when looking at this chart, it's clear that Harmony dominates the top spots, excluding SilverW who managed to hack her way up there. But of course, it's not indicative of actual results. When we start combining buffs and having 2 harmonies, the buffs generally will be very oversaturated. But because some harmonies buff so much, it's usually the better option to pick something like Sunday Robin. But when we start going down the list or trying different combinations with our top supports, Nihility actually becomes much more viable. Next, I've put the character's current Pride Win tier list ratings to see if there's a correlation between the damage amp and performance. And safe to say, not really. There are so many external factors at play, such as teammates, MOC format, or even elements, and factors I had to exclude like uptime, other buffs, or utility. Not to mention, many of these guys aren't even dedicated supports. So yeah, we can't take these results too literally, but they are still mathematically correct in a vacuum and should be fairly close to the actual results in game. A Cipher will be amping close to a Tribbie, and Jiaoqiu will be amping slightly less than both of them. And while Tingyun in a vacuum is actually buffing more than all three of them, in game with another support and self buffs, the tables do get flipped around. So when looking at this chart, please remember the disclaimers. Oh, and I guess to answer the question, are modern supports really that much better? Not really. This is in regards to the 5 stars because sadly, we can't freaking compare the 4 stars because they don't exist. But yeah, that's the entire video. I'm really glad you made it to the end. If you have any questions or perhaps insights, I'd love to hear them in the comments. I'm planning to cover the 3.4 buffs first to our units, but we'll just see how it goes. Perhaps the 3.4 characters are just so cool I gotta cover them first. But yeah, peace!